Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And I always blow that first opening line. And the title of this evening's show is going to be Quality and Organizational Performance in America. And we'll be talking with my guest, Bill Denney. Thank you for coming on the show. And his resume is incredible, what he's been doing all of his life and his working life and like that. And we may get into some kind of personal stuff because he's from a part of the country where I'm from. And how'd you say it was?
Kunas from Louisiana. That's intended to be a compliment.
You bet it is. Of course it is, yeah. How are you feeling right now? I'm a little nervous. I usually am when I start a show. Are you nervous or are you okay?
Well, maybe I'm a little nervous, but I'm fine.
All right. As you know, the show goes in two segments. First segment is the bio segment. We talk about who you are, where you come from, and all those kinds of stuff. We won't do a complete psychiatric examination, but we'll get close to it. No, we won't. And the second half of the show, we'll talk about the subject of the show, quality and organizational performance in America, and other related things. And we'll see how long it takes for us to get through the personal part. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes, sometimes it takes 35, 40 minutes. My director is yelling at me, get to the subject.
Oh, okay.
But we'll go from there, okay? So let's start right out with.
Well, I just want to tell you, Don, I have been on television before. Between the ages of 4 and 6, my mother decided that she wanted me to be in commercials. And so in New Orleans, there was a studio and they made commercials and I went. And at that young age, initially, it was very interesting and fun. But then eventually, as all kids get tired of toys, it became boring and I didn't want to do it. So I remember one time when I was 6 years old, my mother drugged me off to the studio and I didn't want to go. But she said it was an obligation, we had to go there, we did. And there was a new director that I had not worked with before, and I didn't like him. He was very gruff. And so I was supposed to go over to a table, a dining table, take a cookie out of a cookie jar, and then chew it and smile like it was just so yummy. And somehow, for whatever reason, I got in some argument with him, and he was yelling, go get the cookie, and yada, yada. So I said, okay, lights, camera, action. I go over, I take the cookie out, I munch it up in my mouth, and then I walk back over to him and spit it on him.
And did you really?
And that was my last time in a studio.
I'm glad there's no cookies in the studio.
And he fired me on the spot, by the way. But in the car, my mother was kind enough to say, you know, if you don't want to do this, you don't really have to.
Really? So, boy, that's a memorable experience. And 6 years old, you remember it, huh?
I remember it very well.
Well, I'm glad there's no cookies on this table.
Me too.
We're going to have a good time tonight because the little I know about you, you have had an interesting life and working career in the places you've been, so we're going to have a good time, I know that. So let's start out with my regular stock questions. If I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you can say, I don't want to answer that, or you can tell me to get lost or whatever. I also have one or two trick questions for all of my guests, questions they least expect, so I can catch you off guard.
Okay.
So I can ask you one right now or surprise you later on?
Surprise me.
So when and where were you born?
I was born in New Orleans in September of 1944.
44.
Just before, a year or so before the end of the war. My father worked in the oil fields, which I didn't realize it at the time, but he was an older fellow. He was 44 when I was born, so he couldn't go in the military, but he had a national importance job being in the oil field.
Sure.
Because we certainly needed a lot of oil and gas at that time. It was a wonderful place at the time. It's never, when you go back, it's never like you remember it.
No way.
But
Whoa,
we were
difference.
not wealthy. In fact, we weren't really poor, but we were relatively poor. But when you're a kid, you don't know that you're poor. You just have friends, and your parents feed you, and they love you, and everything is wonderful.
Brothers and sisters, did you have any of those?
No, I don't know whether it was fortunate or unfortunate, but I was an only child, so I was severely spoiled by my parents.
Yeah. And I remember back then, and it was Depression time for me because I was born in 1928, and all sorts of other things went on there too. But as the years have gone by, things have changed, times change. What part of New Orleans did you live in?
We lived in Marrero, if you
Marrero.
know where that
Oh,
is. It's on
yeah.
the west bank of the river.
Yeah. And I was born in the Ninth Ward,
Ah,
and we moved up to the Seventh Ward when I was about 8 years old, which is a step up.
mm-hmm.
Of course, we only had electricity and little water in the house and a single cord from the ceiling with a light bulb in it. But you were beyond that time.
Yeah. Although I think it was 1956 when we first got air conditioning and a television at the same time. And these were in the living room. So
Yeah.
we were always in the living room in the evening because there was a ceiling fan was the only cooling we had. And then there were gas heaters that we had to get up in the morning and light so we didn't freeze while we were getting dressed.
You youngsters nowadays, you don't know what a good time was. First trick question. Ready? Why were you born?
Why was I born?
Everyone always repeats the question back to me.
Right. So, philosophically speaking, or from the perspective of my parents wanting a child?
Whatever you want to say. Whatever you want to say.
Well, the reality is my parents wanted a child, and I was fortunate to be that child because I had wonderful parents, especially a wonderful father. I was closer to my father than I was to my mother. Everything I am today, I realize I am only my father's child.
Yeah.
But I was from another perspective.
Sure.
I have been extremely fortunate in my life to be in positions where I can learn from other people, help people where I can, share the knowledge that I have gained, and so on. So I had cancer when I was around 26.
26.
And I was fortunate to be in the military at the time. So they did an exploratory operation, and after the operation, the doctor said there's bad news and there's good news. The bad news is you have 6 months to live. The good news is we have an experimental drug if you want to try it. So I jumped right on that. But every minute since then has been borrowed time, free time. I could have been gone a long time ago. But yet I have had that opportunity to meet so many people, to learn from so many others, to travel to places where I learn things that I couldn't imagine that I might learn. Not academic stuff, but spiritual things and about other human beings. So from my perspective, I was born to be part of all those things.
Yes. Interesting.
Is that psychological enough?
That's beautiful. Whatever you want to go with that kind of question, sure. That's just delightful. I can see it in your eyes as you talk about that. I can see something going on besides just intellectual exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so good, interesting. This is going to be a great interview. I keep saying that. I knew it. So let's continue on. Is there anything significant about your cultural or racial heritage that's worth mentioning? Sometimes people have something to say, and sometimes they're only American white bread. How about you?
Well, I don't know. When I was young and in my early adult years, I had that strong New Orleans accent. Somehow I've lost that along the way, I guess because I lived so many different places, and there were things in that accent, in cultural sayings about things that I eventually learned were not quite correct.
Yeah.
So I just learned and changed, I
Yeah.
guess.
I did too, but when I'm with another coon ass and in about 2 or 3 minutes I slip back in and talk
I
like we
know
used to.
when we go to New Orleans, my wife says, it doesn't take you any time to get that accent back.
That's why I love Brett Favre. He's from next door anyhow, yeah. So, a religious preference, do you have one nowadays, or did you ever have one?
Well, as a child, I was Catholic. I guess I'm a Reformed Catholic.
Been there, done that.
My mother at one time thought I was going to be a priest, and
Been there, done that. Were you an altar boy
and
too?
I was going to be an altar boy, but the altar boys in our neighborhood were kind of thugs, and I decided I didn't want to be associated with them. But once I left home at that early age of 18 to 20, my perspective on the world changed somewhat. In college, I first read about the Buddha, and I became intrigued about that idea of inner spirituality instead of outer religion. So I never went back to a religion. My wife and I, when we were in Texas, we joined the Unitarian Church.
Been there, done
that. Because they're open to all religions and all ideas.
Yes.
And we haven't done that yet here. We haven't quite settled on the leaders of the churches that we have here. But we thoroughly enjoy the Portland Humanist group and that kind. It's people ask me about when I go to India, I go to many different religious areas.
Yes.
I have Sikh friends, and on Sundays I'll go to their Gurdwara, which is what they call the temple, and just sit and meditate and listen to them reading the prayers from their holy book. They don't have a service, they just read prayers, and the prayers are about how to live your life. Now, I don't understand them because I don't understand the language. But there's a certain soothing spirituality about listening to that, like Gregorian chants, our Buddhist chants, our Hindu prayers. Just the sound of the feeling that is in those things reaches me spiritually. So when I explain this to some people, they say, you're a very religious person. But I'm not a religious person. My wife and I feel like we are spiritual, but not religious.
What does that mean, spiritual, for you, when you feel like you're spiritual? Can you say a few words about that? I know it's a broad subject and people have all sorts of views about it, and I've considered it for a number of years.
I'm not quite sure I can explain it.
No one can.
But it is that feeling of inner peace about things that touch you inwardly as a human being, like going and sitting at the Sikh Gurdwara, or going with my friends who are Hindu and they sing prayers. Last time I was there, a very close friend who is his family is Hindu. Their God, from where they are in India, can't think of the name of the god right now. Anyway, but they were having a birthday for this god.
Sure.
And so there was a banquet and there were prayers sung and all of this sort of stuff. I don't understand what they're saying, and I'm not worshiping that god, but I feel very touched inwardly by being a part of that. Ganesha, that's the name of the god.
Yes, I remember reading about it, yeah. So, have you had an experience recently in your adult life that you would characterize it had an effect on you that you would call spiritual? I have a couple because I've been doing this for a while, and I'll tell you mine first, or shall I hear yours?
Tell me yours first.
Yeah. To me, spiritual is something that occurs within this me that is beyond or escapes defining in terms of feelings or anything that is associated with the neocortex of thinking of assigning words to it. It's a feeling that occurs in me that I just wrote a poem recently that talks about the feeling. Is it happiness or joy? And I think I suggested it's beyond bliss, this feeling. There's a little kid across the street where we live in Beaverton, Oregon, and I watched him practically being born. He has a little sister too. And something about him, I guess he was just starting to walk, and he's got a big head, and his little legs are about 6 inches long. He never ever walked, he ran. And to see little Ryan out with his mom in the street, or his dad, and just see him run, and there's something, it makes my eyes red. That's the feeling that occurs if I'm fortunate enough to have something happen in my existence at that moment, to have that feeling occur. So I welcome those when they happen. I don't know as I can have that feeling and decide to go someplace and do something and have that feeling occur, but something happens and that feeling occurs. That's spiritual for me, if I may.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure to describe it as spiritual, but we have had over the years, my wife and I, several golden retrievers. The tragedy, the joy of the time they're with you is wonderful, but the tragedy of when they have to leave is extremely difficult, but in a way, it too is spiritual.
Yes.
Each one of them that we had to have put down, so to speak, they have all laid in my lap when the doctor gave them the injection. All of them either died from cancer, and we have one right now that we have to take Saturday, and she's dying of kidney failure.
Oh, I'm
15
sorry.
and a half years old. I mean, that's like
old.
100 years in our time. But that feeling of having to lose her, there's a feeling of oneness of us and those creatures. We are all together. And that's a characteristic of many religions around the world. It's certainly a characteristic of native religions, that we are all one. The Lakota have a saying, "Mi taku ayasin," which means we are all related. And it's what they say instead of hello or goodbye or whatever. It's a greeting, and the greeting is we are all related. It's a reminder. That's a spiritual thing to me.
Of course, I hear you and I see it. Yeah. Story. My neighbor up the street from me, a few doors up, has a golden retriever. It's his second one that I know. We were there about 17 years in that neighborhood. And whenever I leave the house, I go out and see if they're out where I can say hello to him. And he's my friend. When I'm maybe 30 yards away and I'm walking up the sidewalk to where he is, and he sees me and he starts wagging his tail, and I imitate him, and he imitates me, and then we talk to each other. And we look at each other's eyes. And I've seen some of these recent shows, particularly on television, about dogs and how they communicate with them, with their humans. New stuff, new research, scientific stuff. And I understand now what's happened between me and this golden. And we look at each other. And then he greets me and plays with me for a while, and he stretches in submission. And then he goes over to his human. I says, "How's your human?" And he goes over his human. And then he licks his human on the, just fascinating. And that's a feeling that's approaching spiritual, if I may, for me. There's different depths of spiritual feelings.
Yes. But when you look into each other's eyes, you are the same creatures in the universe. You are together.
Okay.
And the pain of losing them is the price we pay for everything they give us over time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. uh, Education. Boring, terrible stuff. Talk about your education.
Um, Another area where I've been extremely lucky, I was not a good student. In fact, as a young person, I was in Catholic school in Marrero.
Been there, done that. I'm going to stop saying that.
Oh my gosh, I've had my knuckles rapped by the nuns. I've written things on the blackboard 1,000 times and so forth. But I was not doing well, and my parents thought I needed more discipline and a better education. So they sent me to a military school on St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans. It was a day school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to cross the ferry, take the streetcar, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Began when I was in 7th grade, and it was a good experience. There were some tough kids in this school. I remember my very first day, one of the things you had to do before lunch was go out in a platoon and march up and down the streets and so and so. And I was mouthing off, as I was prone to do at that time as not such a good kid.
Been there, done that.
And one of the high school officers came up and punched me in the kidney, and I went straight down, and he said, "Shape up." And then I shaped up.
A little persuading.
Yes. But I did fairly well in high school there. It was a good school. But I was not prepared to go to college. So my mother kindly shipped me off to LSU in Baton Rouge.
Louisiana State University.
Yes, after I graduated. And I promptly flunked out my first semester as a freshman. The only class I passed was called Books and Libraries, and it was how to go use the library. Everything else.
Why were you flunking out so often?
I joined a fraternity. I was playing handball, and I loved that. And I frankly did not know how to study for college. I was unprepared. So I went to a couple of different schools and not doing well until 1967 when I decided I was not going to go anymore. And that was when they were having a draft, and you had an exemption if you were in college. But I knew my number was coming up, so I enlisted in the Air Force. And while I was in basic training, the Army sent me a note and said, "Welcome, Uncle Sam wants you." Fortunately, it was too late. But all that time, they told us in basic training, no matter what you think or what you want to do, you're going to Vietnam. But they had a test, a language test, and they said anybody that wants to volunteer can take this language test. But if you pass, you're going to go to Vietnam. They were preparing everybody psychologically at that time. But I took the language test, I passed it, and they assigned me to Serbo-Croatian. I had to go to the base library to learn that that's what they spoke in Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia?
Yes, so I was fortunate. They sent me to language school in California, in Monterey.
Yeah.
And then they sent me to some more training back in Texas, and then to Frankfurt, Germany. And I flew on C-130s between Germany and Greece, mostly up the Adriatic, and we listened to the various East Bloc countries until I got out.
You learned that language?
I did. I probably can't say much in it now, but I learned all the military communications at the time. So when I got out, my feeling at that time was, another place I was very lucky. I got assigned to a group in Germany that flew on these Hercules aircraft, wonderful aircraft.
Big ones, yeah.
And I came to a realization I was the only person in my squadron that did not have a degree. And I thought, my gosh, if all these other guys can get a degree, I can sure get a degree. So I decided when I got out that I was going to go back to college. But my grades were so bad, I went to an interview in Angelo State University in Texas, small college town. And I explained to whoever it was I was talking to that I wanted to go back to school. And he opened my transcript and he said, "Son, I think you ought to just go back home." but I said, "No, give me a chance and I'll do something." And from then on, my grades were very good. And I got into a master's program and the PhD program and so forth. Not because I was smart, just because I worked my butt off.
And you had some basic stuff you didn't even know you had. What's your PhD in?
History.
History.
Mostly early American.
Interesting. We need 2 hours for you, not just one. So we'll talk more about your work in the second half of the show. And your partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, you have a partner?
I do. I have a wonderful wife. I have no clue why she stays with me or puts up with me, but she is a lovely, wonderful person. She's from Arkansas. We met in Dallas. We both worked in the same business there for a while, and she has traipsed around doing a lot of various things together.
Will you tell her how you feel about her right now? Look at that camera and tell her what's going on.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea why you put up with me.
Okay. And any children?
No, just the furry kind.
Just the furry kind, and I can tell that you kind of like them. Yeah. And would you hazard where you are on the political continuum, left, right, centrist, or all over the place, or what?
No, I've never been right. Maybe early on I didn't quite know how I felt, but I am definitely left.
Definitely left. Well, ditto. Okay, let's...
They're just associated with that.
Of course.
I was taking a shower this afternoon and the doorbell rang. So I was about to get in the shower. I went to the window and yelled down to ask who was there and what did they want. And some young man had a pamphlet, "I'm supporting so-and-so in the next election." I said, "Is she a Democrat or a Republican?" "She's a Democrat." "Okay, you can leave the pamphlet."
Okay, that says a lot. So we're going to stop in a few minutes, but not just yet. Any persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admire or admired or looked up to, and I'm sure your dad would be included in that consideration? Any names come to mind? I have a few that I feel good about and admired.
Well, John Kennedy certainly was a great inspiration because he was president when I was a young man.
Yes.
He was very motivating, and I miss him.
So do I.
Yeah. In non-living, I mean, the Buddha, I'm fascinated by. Here was a man who went through so much struggle to be able to explain to us why we suffer. And it's because of desire. We always want something, and because we don't have it or can't get it, then we emotionally suffer. We suffer because we think this shell that we wear is more important than the inner self and the outer world. And so I learned that lesson from just reading about him.
How did you get the way that you are? Were you more like your dad or your mom?
Well, I think I'm much more like my dad, I have to say. In later years, my mother and I didn't get along that well. She was a dear lady, but her politics veered right, and she was very strong about her opinions and so on. So we sort of drifted apart, and
Yeah.
she was one of those people who often drift to the right that are not open to discussions.
Yeah. Where are they today, your parents?
Well, they're both gone. I lost my father in 1959
Wow, that's a
and my
while
mother
ago.
about 5 years ago.
Uh-huh. Wow, okay. So anything more before we take a break?
No, I can just say that in a way, for lack of a better word, my father haunts me and has haunted me all of my life in that he always used to say, do the right thing. And as a child, I would say, what does that mean? How will I know if I'm doing the right thing? And he'd say, don't worry, you will know. And he was right. And so every time in my life I've wanted to take the easier course in college or do something easy in work, then I'd always remember that. And it would take me longer, it would cost me more, but I was more satisfied that I had done the right thing.
Yeah.
He had different advice, but one of the things he advised was a challenge for me. I remember when I was about 8 years old, he liked to play golf. So sometimes I'd go to the golf club with him, and after they played, he'd go in the bar with his friends. And so one time I came in and I said, Dad, can I borrow 50 cents for a milkshake? So it shows you how long ago that was. And he looked at me and he could see behind me at the door was a little girl about my age. And so he said, son, here's $1. Never let a lady buy her own drinks. And that has been a very expensive thing that she advised me on.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Shall we take a break, Mr. Director? Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who have not seen this show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about the subject of the show instead of all the personal stuff, which I've enjoyed so much. And I'm glad we decided to stop because we could go on for an hour with stories about your life and growing up and that sort of a thing. I'm enjoying you so very, very much. Yeah. So now, let's see. I got some questions here. Title of the show is Quality and Organizational Performance in America. What is quality and organizational performance in America? And what is the concern about it?
That's a good question. Quality is one of those words like motherhood and apple pie. It's who could not be for quality? Do you want quality? Of course we should have quality.
Yeah.
But what is quality? So maybe I can explain it that there are basically two types of quality. There is attribute quality. That is to say, we buy something because it's shiny, it's well made, it's the manufacturer is, we know is a good manufacturer, it's something we can use, it's functional. We define what quality means to us,
Sure.
but it's an attribute. There is another kind of quality, and that is sort of a process quality. So we could say of organizations, they are a quality organization if they're continuously improving what they do and how they do it.
What they do and how they do it.
They are a quality organization if they are delivering to their customers what their customers want and their customers tell them that. That is, they have satisfied and engaged customers. They're a quality organization if their employees are engaged and satisfied in working there and are excited about helping them be successful. So all of these kind of things, they aren't necessarily attributes, but they have to do with processes. How they find out what their customers want and how they deliver that. How they engage their employees and how they make sure their employees are happy to work there and have the knowledge and tools and skills to do the work they need from their employees, and so on. So now the concern is that in some major areas of our economy, quality may not be what we would like it to be. And those three major areas are healthcare, education, and business in general. We can talk a little about what kind of business. Let's start with healthcare, for example.
Sure.
In 1999, the Institute of Medicine published a report in which they said, the report was called To Err is Human. In this report, they said,
To err is human.
To err is human.
Yes.
They said, it's difficult to be sure because we're not capturing well the data, but there are somewhere between 50 and 100,000 deaths, unnecessary deaths, because of unnecessary errors in the healthcare system. Wrong medications were delivered, diagnosis was not correct, heart attacks in emergency rooms when that could really be prevented, hospital-acquired pneumonia, hospital-acquired infections. All of these things are causing unnecessary deaths. Then in 2004, they came out with another report, the Institute of Medicine, in which and the name of that report is The Quality Chasm in Healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, it is confirmed that there are at least 100,000 unnecessary deaths in our healthcare system, but it may be 200,000.
Wow.
Then there was another report by another group in 2005, I can't remember who they were, that they said, yes, there are at least 200,000 deaths from medical errors of one kind or another. The general feeling is that it has not gotten any better. And it has to do with processes and discipline. It's not that doctors and nurses aren't well educated and trained.
Uh-huh.
It's not that they don't care about their patients and want to do the right thing. But nonetheless, these things happen. A study from Johns Hopkins a few years ago said that hospital policies and procedures are followed about 50% of the time.
50%?
In 2005, there was another study that said we have a 50-50 chance of having a positive outcome when we enter the healthcare system. So that's a problem.
Only 50-50?
Maybe it's better now, I don't
know. A good
know.
study?
So the other issue is education. In almost every measure that we hear a couple of times a year, American children rank anywhere from 15th to 25th in the world in developed children in developed countries that have decent educations.
25th, America?
Yes.
Yes, since I've heard that before, yes.
And it depends on whether we're talking about math, science, reading comprehension, but nonetheless, we're doing poorly. It's not because educators don't want to do a good job. It's not because we're not pouring enough money into the education system.
Yeah.
Something else is wrong that has to do with how we're educating. And just a couple of days ago, the College Board published the information for the latest SAT test. So of 1,700,000 students that took the SAT test, 44% were deemed eligible by the College Board to have the potential to be successful in college. For African Americans, it was 15%.
Oh my gosh.
So it's not that we want to make sure everybody goes to college. Everybody doesn't have to go to college. But how will our children be able to participate in and compete in the global economy?
Yes.
That is a given. It's not going away. And somehow they have to be prepared for that. So other students will be better prepared in science and math. Go to any large company locally, go to Intel, and see how many Indians they have in their business helping them succeed, because they're getting a better education.
Yes.
The CEO of Intel said, "We go where the smart people are." So when we are concerned about offshoring, outsourcing, sending jobs away, it's not because of cheap labor. It's because of knowledge. Companies are going looking for knowledge.
Yes.
Today I read in the paper that 2.7 million American jobs in the last 10 years have gone to China.
To China?
That's not counting how many went to India or Vietnam or some other place. So that's a problem. The same is true in the world of business, so to speak. Not only have we outsourced all these jobs, but many companies have gone bankrupt or moved their businesses to another country. So there's something, I don't know all the details about Burger King. The company that owns Burger King is moving offshore somewhere. They move for tax purposes, they move for a variety of purposes, but that they're moving only because of cheap labor is a fallacy, because a lot of the cost in healthcare, in education, and in businesses, labor is a cost, but there are other wasteful ways they run their businesses that can be improved.
And that's what you're about.
Well, that's my concern, and have been fortunate to have an opportunity to help some of these organizations.
And you work for an organization that sends you to these different countries and to
No,
teach them something different?
No, that's really just me going. I don't work for a big company or any organization.
How do they learn about you?
I have, for 20-something years, I've been a member of the American Society for Quality. I'm a fellow of the society, and organizations look to ASQ for subject matter experts, and I've just been fortunate. Before I did this, I was CEO of an organization in Texas that promoted the Baldrige methodology for organizational excellence, and that I've been a examiner in the Baldrige program for 18 years, and so I share that knowledge.
Oh wow!
So
you are a do-gooder, a helper around the globe, but they must hold you in pretty high esteem and respect what you're about, since you're constantly working and going to this country and that country.
well, they put up with me, but most of my work right now is in India for a large corporation there. So this this concept that I mentioned, the Baldrige criteria for performance excellence. It's only one of many such criteria or frameworks that are used around the world. There's one in Europe, there's one in Canada, there's one in Singapore, Dubai has one, and so forth. So there are different ones. 2 years ago, I was privileged to go to Dubai. They wanted me to talk about comparative models, comparative methodologies to help organizations succeed. And what I told them was, it doesn't make any difference which methodology you use, whether you take the Canadian model or you take the European model or you take the American Baldrige model, they are all basically the same. What's important is that it's a structure. So here's the basis of the problem in all of these organizations, whatever type of organization there are. There's 4 basic problems. Structure and discipline, that's sort of those are sort of strategic issues. And then leadership and employee engagement are more tactical things.
Okay.
An organization that doesn't have a structure that they believe in, that they stick to, that they say, this is how we will run our business, will run amok. Because you're the psychologist, but my experience with human beings is we take the path of least resistance. No matter what it is, if we do not have something that we're disciplined to do, we will do whatever we want to. And it may not be what's best for the company or the hospital or the school system or the country, for that matter. So an organization should have a structure that they're going to use for their organization. It may be Baldrige, it may be the European model that's called EFQM, or whatever it may be. I don't care, but agree that this is how you're going to run your business. Then have the discipline to stick by it. Because what happens to many organizations is they run amok by saying they believe in something and then they don't do it, or they don't want to enforce it, or they don't have the discipline to stick with it.
So you got a call to go to some corporation in Dubai, and you go in there, and how do you get a look at what they're doing so you have something to address where they can improve?
Well, that's pretty much it. I have to see what they're doing. Now, this corporation in India was a very interesting and unique thing. It was the chairman of the board of the broader corporation, which has 2 insurance companies, 1 manufacturing company, 1 drug trials company, and 11 hospitals, and is bringing on a retirement home system.
Kind of big.
So in my conversation with him, he said, my concern about all this, because we have so many different companies, is we're not speaking the same language. If I have someone from GE come in, I know they're from GE. Or if I see some people talking, I can say they're from GE because they're talking about Six Sigma. They have a language of quality that they speak. My companies do not have a language of quality. What should we do? So the recommendation is pick a discipline, pick a structure, use Baldrige or use EFQM or use something else, but I know Baldrige, and all of the companies should use this. It's a disciplined structure. What's interesting about all of these programs, all of these structures, is they're based on what successful organizations do. So the Baldrige criteria for performance excellence has a series of questions.
We got 5 or 6 minutes left before they shut us down.
Oh no! I can't believe. So anyway, that's the idea, and that's the problem with hospitals, schools, and business in general. It's why we give up and send things offshore, because we don't have a structure to run our business. our hospitals,
No
our schools.
structure.
And those organizations, those schools, those hospitals, those businesses who have taken on a structure like Baldrige or others like it have been very successful because it forces the organization to align itself with what's important.
So how did you learn what the ingredients are or how to do this? How to it seems like there was a lot of stuff to learn.
Well,
Including who you are personally and how you come across and your sense of real concern as you're helping these corporations.
I guess the feeling of continuous improvement is part of my nature. And so when I encountered this quality approach, it seemed a natural thing to do. And so being in the program where I was a volunteer assessor to assess businesses, I learned a lot about businesses, and I learned how this methodology of structured principles of running an organization can make the organization very successful.
How did your PhD in history help you in your profession today?
That's a good question. But history gives you a long perspective.
Sure.
I think if not to criticize accountants or lawyers or anything else, anyone
Go
else,
ahead.
but their perspective is mostly in the short term. What the study of history helps you understand is nothing comes easy, nothing comes fast, everything comes from discipline, and it takes time, over time, to do it, and you have to be patient. And maybe that's what history taught me, I don't know. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Don.
I don't blame you. I would too. We got a couple of minutes left. What else? You want to talk a little more about the business you're in or something personal or whatever else? I wanted to have some open time for whatever it is you want to address or talk about.
Well, I can tell you my travels have been, for lack of a better term, a huge blessing. On one of my trips to India, I sat next to a lady and I learned she was 85 years old. And she was going to India. Her husband could no longer travel with her, but she was going. She said because her father told her when she was a child, travel as much as you can, even if you have to borrow to do it, because it will be the best education you will ever have. And all of my schooling, all of those degrees mean nothing compared to what I learned in my travels. It has been the inner thing that it has changed, the spirituality that it has changed, to meet other people in other cultures and learn from them and what they do and how they think. And now I am blessed that I have many friends in India. And when I go, the difficulty is, who am I going to spend this weekend with? Or whose house can I go to for dinner this weekend? They used to put me up in an expensive hotel, and do we have to stop?
No, not
okay.
yet.
So I sort of rebelled against that. These expensive business hotels in India are boring as hell. And so I got a driver and I went out one day looking for bed and breakfast or just places where people had rooms to rent. And I came across this wonderful family, two middle-aged people that have two young girls and a grandmother. And at the time they had a great-grandmother there who has since passed on. But it's a joy to be there. I'm in a neighborhood. I get to see real people all the time. I get to go to a corner grocery store, not locked in a fancy hotel that has no meaning, no spirituality. To be out among people is spirituality.
Okay. Do they like you?
Well, I hope so. They
no
treat
doubt.
me they treat me nice. I'm grateful. But in those trips to India, one of my trips, I went to Bodh Gaya, which is where the Buddha reached enlightenment. A very moving thing to sit under the tree he supposedly sat under. I didn't reach enlightenment. My butt hurt, but I felt great being there.
I'm sure you have many more stories that we can probably share at some future meeting again. I've enjoyed visiting with you so much.
I have too. I can't believe where the time went.
So you have about 20 seconds to say something to the viewers out there, whatever comes to mind. Go ahead.
Well, like as Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. If you follow money and you lose the money, you will have nothing. But if you do what's important to you, you will always have that.
Thank you again. Mr. E, shall we stop now and do some PSAs? You want to get my shows, the local broadcast schedule, go to my website and click on present day activities to see when my show is broadcast. And to watch my shows on the web, go to Don Baham YouTube and click on a particular show. What else do we have? The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be further down the tube than they are right now. To get my shows broadcast by other stations in your local area around the country, go to pegmedia.org and follow the instructions on how to have your local community access channel get my shows live over there so they can broadcast locally. And we got to amend amend the Constitution to end corporate personhood. Go to move-to-amend.org and learn what you can do to overcome that Citizens United decision and to save a wonderful experiment called America and democracy. Thanks for watching. Remember KFC, not that KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too. And you too, nurse. And you too. Thanks again. Good night.